Today, we're diving into the latest Ulster Airmail from July 2025.
And it's packed, really. You've got stories weaving together history, some pretty clever innovation, personal stories too, and, the real-world challenges of keeping things flying today. We'll touch on, everything from the legacy of Concorde, the world of home-built aircraft, which is fascinating, sometimes risky, right through to military logistics, which often go unseen, and even aviation art. It's surprising how it all connects.
And we actually start there with a pretty somber reflection in the editor's foreword. It marks 25 years since the Concorde crash, flight AF 4590, just outside Charles de Gaulle in Paris. The editor shares this really personal memory, hearing those double booms from French jets, breaking the sound barrier over the channel nearly every evening.
And that specific aircraft, FBTSC, it sort of embodies the whole Concorde spirit. I mean, think about it. It was apparently once bought for £1.
Really?
Yeah, incredible. And the captain on that last flight, he'd actually windsurfed across the Atlantic, a real adventurer. So it wasn't just a machine, was it? It was more, about human aspiration.
The editor puts it beautifully, saying, Concorde epitomized the human aspiration to rise above the mundane, the sheer excitement of aviation.
And that reflection on risk, it connects straight to something the chairman mentions, the recent terrible Air India crash, nearly 300 people lost. You feel the emotion when he talks about the single survivor, calling it a miracle. And it really highlights why we have to wait for the investigators, let them piece it together properly, rather than just speculating. It's always that balance, isn't it? The wonder of flight versus the inherent risks.
So moving from those somber lessons, let's look at how the spirit of aviation still absolutely captivates people. The magazine covers the Armed Forces Day 2025. Sounds like it was a huge success. Great photos of the Red Arrows, the RAF Falcons parachute team. Looks spectacular.
Well, interestingly, the Ulster Aviation Society, they actually had a few reservations beforehand. There was some kind of mix-up about where they were supposed to be, what they were doing. Apparently, someone at the council got their vice chairman mixed up with the Ulster Flying Club's vice chairman. But, it got sorted out, and in the end, it looked really well organized.
Sorted out, yes, but maybe not the traffic plan. The report mentions a big-time traffic problem. Some people just gave up after an hour waiting, which is a shame.
Yeah, and that reminded the chairman of a similar situation, actually, the 1985 Aldergrove airfare. He recalls telling the ops director they should expect maybe 40,000, even 50,000 people. And the director was visibly shocked. And sure enough, it was chaos. People pushing past the gates, hundreds stuck in traffic jams. But here's the thing. Despite all that, the chairman says it was probably the best ever air show to be seen in Northern Ireland, and genuinely one of the best days of his life.
And looking forward, they mentioned the European Heritage Open Days coming up on September 13th and 14th. They're looking for a lot of volunteers, about 100 a day, hoping to beat last year's 7,000 visitors.
And speaking of interesting events, they recently had Johnny McNee talk about the Donegal Spitfire. It's quite a story. Inspiring and sometimes hilarious was the description of how the dig happened.
Okay, so we've seen the big events, the crowds. Let's shift focus now to individual brilliance, maybe even eccentricity. Let's talk about Rex McCandless. Lived 1915 to 1992, a Northern Irish icon, really. Known for motorbikes, the Norton featherbed frame, that was him, and even a four-wheel drive that apparently out-rovered the Land Rover.
He sounds like quite the character. And his mind, it was something else. Left school at 13, no qualifications. But he had this mercurial mind and problem-solving ability that was reportedly second to none. His whole approach was to kind of ignore the obvious answer. He'd go right back to first principles to find these really innovative solutions.
Wow.
But the article also mentions he fell out with most people he worked with. Yet, socially, he was apparently the life and soul of the party and great fun.
That's fascinating, a complex figure.
Definitely. The sort you often find with real innovators, perhaps.
So his interest eventually shifted towards aviation. He and his brother bought a de Havilland Hornet Moth, GADNE. Apparently, it still had his undercarriage mods on it years later. But his real passion project became this idea of personal air transport, something convenient, something that could land almost anywhere.
Yeah, and his first attempt was with a kit, a Benson B.7 gyroglider. It failed the Rex test, as the article puts it. The speed wasn't controllable. The controls were these awkward overhead levers. The engineering just felt, basic.
So disappointment turned into motivation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He decided right then to design and build his own. That was the real exploratory element he loved.
Which led to the first prototype, GRRTZ-1, built in late 1961. And get this, for dedication, he actually set up a caravan in the hangar so he wouldn't waste time commuting from Belfast.
living the job. And the design itself was typically McCandless, maybe a bit risky in parts. It used a Triumph Thunderbird motorbike engine, 650cc, about 35 horsepower, driving a pusher propeller at the back.
Okay.
The rotor control system used cables connected to the stick, described as not entirely safe, harking back to like 1910 Blériot. And it had this unusual setup with twin fins and moving unbalanced rudders and fixed tailplanes at first, and the classic Ulster problem damp air warping the wooden rotor blades. His solution?
Let me guess. The Caravan.
You got it. He did the gluing inside the Caravan to keep things warm and dry. Imagine juggling 11-foot rotor blades in your temporary home.
But then things took a serious turn in late 1962. A really bad accident.
Yes, tragically, he slipped while hand-swinging the rotor to start it. Well, he lost the top two joints of the first two fingers of his right hand.
Oh, terrible. Beyond the personal injury, what did that mean for the project?
Well, it created an urgent need for a rotor spin-up mechanism, something safer. It started as a kind of basic belt drive system, but eventually evolved into a proper gearbox solution so you didn't have to hand start the rotor anymore. A hard lesson learned.
Which then led to the second version, GRRTZ2, the definitive prototype, emerging in 1965.
And this one had some major steps forward. He switched to a Volkswagen car engine, flat 4, about 60 horsepower. More power, more reliability. And crucially, he developed and patented his own tooth belt drive for gyroplane use. That was pretty new tech back in '65.
The kind of thing we see in cars now.
Exactly. Very common now. It meant he could get rid of the heady geared shaft drive. He also put in a much safer rod system for rotor control, replacing those cables, and a clever fuel system too.
So technically it was getting there, but his dream of mass production, it hit some snags, didn't it?
It did. There was the calamity-crashing GRTZ2 right in front of the Duke of Edinburgh during a demonstration at Hillsborough in 1966. Not great publicity.
No, I imagine not.
And then there was a wider issue. AutoGyros in general were having more accidents around that time, linked to this phenomenon called aerodynamic offloading. Basically, the rotor could lose lift unexpectedly. So the Air Registration Board, the ARB, they banned public demonstrations. They essentially branded them potentially unsafe, which just killed the market Rex was hoping for.
So what did he do then?
He went into partnership with a chap named Bill Eakin, transferred the manufacturing rights, and it became the WHE Air Buggy. GAXZB, which the society now has, was one of those.
But that partnership didn't last either, did it?
Sadly not. There was an incident where Rex's original tooth belt failed in flight, causing a total power loss. Bill Eakin's response was to double up the belts, an obvious improvement, the article calls it. But Rex apparently didn't like the implied criticism of his design effort. And that disagreement, believe it or not, led to the partnership breaking up.
Wow. Pride getting in the way of progress.
It certainly seems that way. A difficult question for any innovator, I suppose, how you handle improvements suggested by others.
So in the end, are any of these McCandless or air buggy machines still flying?
It seems unlikely today. But thankfully, his legacy is preserved. There are two in the Transport Museum, and as I said, the Ulster Aviation Society now has GAXZB, a fascinating, if ultimately commercially unsuccessful, chapter in personal flight.
Okay, from that very individual pursuit, let's zoom out to the huge collaborative effort needed for something like the Lockheed L1011 TriStar and its iconic Rolls-Royce RB211 engines. We get a real personal connection here from Paul Hutchinson.
Yeah, Paul's story starts way back in 1971. He was just a kid at Dundonald Primary School. His class got dragged outside to watch a TriStar fly past at only 100 feet. And Paul says that moment just sparked this lifelong fascination for him. Amazing how those early experiences stick.
Definitely. And later in his career, the TriStar became this vital lifeline air bridge to the Falkland Islands, didn't it? Bringing mail, parts, just that connection home.
It really was crucial. Paul tells this funny story about a return trip. A wheel change delayed the flight, and he'd been at a dinner involving, as he puts it, excessive consumption of beverages. He nearly missed the flight, but apparently a friendly senior movements officer managed to pour him on board just in time. But beyond the anecdotes, Paul gives us some really valuable insights into the sheer difficulty of keeping that aircraft type flying, especially the RB211 engines in the RAF.
What were the unique challenges there?
Well, the main one was something called cold soaking. Because the RAF TriStars just didn't fly as frequently as civilian ones, the engines didn't get hot as often. This led to higher levels of internal corrosion, making the overhauls much more expensive and time-consuming. But Paul says, through some prudent and sleight-of-hand engineering and logistics management, they ensured no TriStar was ever unavailable for an engine on his watch, which is quite an achievement.
Then the aircraft moved into supporting operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, the primary air bridge. But they were getting old by then.
Yeah, definitely showing her age, constant worries about availability. And this is where a really interesting technical point comes in. Pavement classification number, PCN, and aircraft classification number, ACN.
Okay, what's that about?
Basically, it determines if an aircraft is too heavy for a particular runway or taxiway. The Tristar, even though it was a wide body, only had 2 main undercarriage units plus the nose gear. Compare that to, say, a DC-10 or MD-11, which had 3 main units plus the nose gear. So the Tristar's weight was concentrated on fewer points, giving it a very high ACN.
So it couldn't just land anywhere.
Precisely. It restricts where it can fly into and out of. And Paul knew this from his work on infrastructure, like at Camp Bastion. Critical knowledge for keeping the airbridge going.
Especially as the fleet got older. Supporting the Falklands and Afghanistan must have been a nightmare towards the end. The RAF was the sole operator globally by then, wasn't it? Apart from one NASA plane.
And that led to a massive problem. Parts obsolescence. Parts were just not being made anymore. Simple as that. He gives this stark example. At one point, there were no longer any main wheel hubs available for the aircraft anywhere in the world. Imagine trying to keep a fleet flying when you can't get essential parts like wheel hubs.
That's terrifying from a logistics perspective.
It really is. And he tells this alarming story about a consultancy firm suggesting the RAF should just scrap its remaining TriStar spares to save on storage costs.
You're kidding.
Nope. Paul argued against it, saying they'd end up paying extortionate prices later if they needed something. Thankfully, senior management recognized the flaw in the consultant's plan, and the spares were kept. And Paul's connection comes full circle. His souvenir from that time, a first stage blade of the RB201 engine.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly into something a bit more personal and maybe reflective. Tony Smith, Rummaging Through Air, Part 5. It sounds like a lovely wander through old photos, though he admits he wishes he'd written on the back of them the where, when, and what. A familiar feeling for many of us.
He starts with the challenge of organizing flying for over 400 cadets at an annual camp. Needed big choppers, as he calls them, to Chinooks from RAF owed him.
Then a more somber photo, a Bristol Blenheim under restoration at Duxford. And he shares this really poignant anecdote. His wife used to work with a man who'd flown Blenheims in the war and had actually lost an eye in an engagement with an enemy aircraft.
He also includes pictures from the Southport Airshow Wessex and Gazelle helicopters and the Army Air Corps display team, the Blue Eagles.
And there's one of the Royal Navy Historic Flight Firefly AS-5 folding its wings. The caption has this stark warning: "Don't, the propeller is still turning." A good reminder about prop safety.
Then there's a lovely personal touch, a photo of his late father's favorite aircraft, a Grumman AA-5 GEE-RA. Tony notes it was not regarded by some as an easy aircraft to fly, but he cherishably remembers having a couple of flights in it with his dad. Those memories are priceless.
Then a much more somber photo. It's connected to the Omagh bombing in 1998, where 29 people were killed. He talks about how cadets from his squadron raised funds so 72 Squadron RAF could fly some of the young people affected by the bombing just to bring a little sunshine into their lives. He calls it a very moving experience.
Wow. And he wraps up the rummage with a photo of an RAF Jaguar GR3 from RAF Coltishall, the Saints Squadron aircraft. A really nice mix of personal and historical snapshots.
It sounds like it. Now, quickly touching on some pure history. Made in Ulster, Short Stirlings, Part 23. This sounds like a story of incredible wartime toughness.
It details the lives of specific Stirling bombers. Take N6048. It flew for an incredible 543 hours, 30 minutes. But during that time, it was officially categorized Cat E right off multiple times due to crashes or battle damage, basically deemed beyond economic repair.
But they fixed it anyway.
They did. Repaired and sent back into service. Same with another one. N6049 faced grueling flights, multiple incidents, but kept going. This just shows the sheer resilience of those aircraft and especially the crews and ground staff.
Right. Let's wrap up our deep dive back in the hangars, looking at the work being done to preserve all this history. Heritage happenings.
First up, the Wiley Aviation Art Exhibit. Stephen Riley is refreshingly honest, admitting mixed feelings about the launch because it had been delayed so long and they'd had to scale back the initial plan for a full gallery.
Right. Sometimes things don't go exactly to plan, but how was it received?
Despite only having about 15 guests and no council staff managing to attend, the feedback was unanimous and very positive. And importantly, Wiley's widow was apparently quite chuffed.
That's good to hear.
And the article highlights the real human connection in Wiley's art. There's a story about one of his paintings rejuvenating a former B-24 Liberator pilot, Robert Blair, who'd been ill, and sending a print to the family of a P-51 Mustang pilot, John Benbow, who'd been killed in action. It shows he was an artist who cared not only about his subject, but about people.
That's wonderful. And there's some really big news on the aircraft acquisition front for the Ulster Aviation Society, isn't there? Donations from the RAF Museum.
Huge news. They're absolutely thrilled. First, a Chipmunk T-10 trainer, WP962. This isn't just any chipmunk. It's the one that flew around the world in 1997.
The round-the-world chipmunk. Fantastic.
And secondly, something truly iconic, a Fairy Swordfish 30, HS-503.
The string bag, an actual swordfish.
Yep, a biplane torpedo bomber that achieved legendary results, like the attack on Taranto and crippling the Bismarck. Having one is incredible for the society.
It's amazing what fantastic additions that really will draw people in. And on the heritage front, what's being worked on?
Well, the Gannet and the Sea Prince restorations are moving along. They've been sandblasted, apparently, getting them ready for painting.
More progress.
And there's real excitement about the Wildcat microfiche drawings finally arriving.
Microfiche, like this tiny film sheets?
Yep. Exactly. Detailed blueprints. They've been trying to get proper plans for the Wildcat restoration for, wait for it, over 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah. So finally getting these could be the key to really making progress. It's a huge deal for that project.
I can imagine. What else?
Rapid progress on the AEC Matador vehicle and ZF-378, the Ducano known as Enniskillen, is apparently 99% finished. Just those final small bits.
Sounds like lots happening.
Well, if you've enjoyed this deep dive and you're not yet a member of the Ulster Aviation Society, why not join?
Definitely worth considering.
You can find more information on the membership page of their website at ulsteraviationsociety.org.
We hope you'll join us again next month for another deep dive into fascinating stories from the world of aviation.